Police, anyone here?
If anyone's up there, come down with your hands up now!
I think there's blood on this wall. Yeah, this looks like dried blood.
Step out of the car! Man, move over here! Hands up, please.
Why are you doing this?
Let me ask you this. What did you do to...
18 years old. Her entire future ahead of her. A girl filled with dreams, laughter, and the kind of energy that made people feel alive. But in the final moments of her life, she was surrounded by the worst kind of betrayal. A betrayal so cruel, so heartless, that the people responsible didn't just take her life, they tried to erase her. Her name was Samantha Guthrie. She was last seen walking into a house in Akron, Ohio. A place she believed she would walk out of. A place she had been before. A place filled with familiar faces, faces she thought she could trust. She had no idea she was stepping into her own grave. For days, her mother begged for answers. Her family plastered her face on missing posters, hoping someone, anyone, would come forward. But the silence was deafening. The streets of Akron carried whispers, rumors, half-truths. Some people claimed she ran away. Others said she got caught up with the wrong crowd. But her family knew better. Samantha wouldn't just vanish. Then, the call came. A body had been found. Deep in the woods, buried beneath the cold, damp earth. The search was over, but the nightmare had only just begun. Who did this? Why? And how could the very people she considered friends turn into the monsters that ended her life? This is the story of Samantha Guthrie. And the trap house that became her final stop, Samantha Guthrie was more than just a name in the news. Before the flyers, the search parties, and the crime scene tape, she was a daughter, a friend, a young woman who had her entire life ahead of her. Born in 2000, she was raised in Akron, Ohio, a city that carried both promise and peril. She had dreams, dreams bigger than the streets she grew up on. Samantha wanted to become a neonatal nurse, dedicating her life to helping the most vulnerable. She was smart, kind-hearted, and full of ambition. Even as a teenager, she had a protective nature, always looking out for those she cared about. In high school, she stood out, not just because of her talent but because of her spirit. She was involved in theater, stepping onto the stage with confidence. She wrestled, showing resilience and strength. She played chess, a game of strategy and patience, two things she carried into her everyday life. To those who knew her, Samantha was a fighter, someone who refused to back down, no matter the challenge. Akron, Ohio. A city once thriving in the industrial age, now known for its struggles with crime and addiction. Like many places across America, it was caught in the grip of the opioid crisis. Drugs flooded the streets. Dealers operated in plain sight. And for young people trying to navigate their way through life, it was easy to get pulled in, sometimes without even realizing it. The place where Samantha was last seen wasn't just any house. It was what the streets call a trap house, a location where drugs were sold, used, and where violence often followed. These houses weren't just dangerous. They were places where people disappeared, sometimes forever. November 2018. Samantha leaves home. It's an ordinary day, nothing out of the ordinary. Her mother expects her to return, as she always does. But this time, she doesn't. There's no goodbye. No phone call. Just silence. Days pass. Her phone goes straight to voicemail. Her social media activity stops. Friends who usually hear from her every day suddenly find themselves staring at unanswered messages. And then, the rumors begin. Some claim she ran away. Others whisper that she got involved with the wrong people. But the ones who knew her best refused to believe she would just vanish without a word. Then, a tip comes in. Samantha was last seen at a house known to police. A house tied to drugs, to crime, to people who had nothing to lose. The name, Danny Hamby, surfaces, a name that, at the time, meant nothing to her family. But soon, it would mean everything. What happened inside that house? Why did she go there? And why did no one speak up before it was too late? When Samantha Guthrie didn't return home, panic set in. At first, her family hoped it was a misunderstanding, maybe she lost her phone, maybe she stayed at a friend's house. But as the hours turned into days, that hope began to fade. By the second day, her loved ones knew something was terribly wrong. Samantha wasn't the type to disappear without a word. She always kept in touch. She always let someone know where she was going. Her mother, desperate for answers, began making calls. Friends were contacted. Messages were sent. Social media posts went up. No one had seen her. No one knew where she was. Flyers with Samantha's face started appearing on telephone poles, in shop windows, at gas stations. The words "missing" were printed in bold, a plea for anyone with information to come forward. But the city of Akron is no stranger to disappearances. In neighborhoods where drugs circulate freely, young people vanish far too often. And sometimes, they never come back. Still, her family refused to give up. Then, whispers reached them. A name kept surfacing, Danny Hamby. Someone said she had been with him the night she disappeared. Someone else mentioned a trap house on Lillian Street. The police took notice. They started knocking on doors, questioning those who might know something. At first, no one was talking. But then, an anonymous tip changed everything. November 25, 2018. 10 days after Samantha was last seen. A wooded area near Kent, Ohio. A place quiet enough to hide secrets. It was a hunter who made the discovery. Moving through the brush, he noticed something that didn't belong. He stepped closer. The sight stopped him in his tracks. Beneath a layer of leaves, partially buried in the cold earth, was a body. The police arrived quickly, their faces grim. The body was female. Young. The clothes matched the description of what Samantha had been wearing the day she disappeared. A mother's worst nightmare was confirmed. The missing girl was no longer missing. She was gone. The autopsy report painted a brutal picture. Samantha Guthrie had been shot in the head at close range. The bullet left no chance of survival. But that wasn't all. There were deep lacerations on her neck, suggesting someone wanted to make sure she never left that house alive. Who could do something like this? And why? Police needed answers. Fast. The investigation turned to one question: who was the last person to see Samantha alive? Danny was no stranger to law enforcement. He was known in the Akron area for his involvement in drugs and violent crimes. He had connections to the trap house where Samantha was last seen. And when the police brought him in for questioning, the lies began to unravel. At first, he denied knowing anything. Said he hadn't seen Samantha in days. But investigators weren't buying it. Witnesses started coming forward, and a horrifying picture began to emerge. Samantha had walked into that house on Lillian Street expecting to leave. But something happened inside. Something that turned her so-called friends into executioners. And Danny Hamby wasn't the only one involved. The deeper detectives dug, the more names appeared. More than one person had been in that house that night. More than one person had played a role in Samantha's final moments. And soon, police had the evidence they needed. Arrests were about to be made. Justice was coming. The house on Lillian Street was no ordinary home. It was a trap house, where drugs were sold, deals were made, and violence was never far away. It was a place of addiction and crime, a revolving door for people who had nowhere else to go. And it was the last place Samantha Guthrie was seen alive. Armed with a search warrant, police entered the house. Inside, they found what they expected: drug paraphernalia, scattered debris, a place that had seen too much violence. But what they really needed was proof. Proof that Samantha had been there. Proof of what happened to her. Then, they found it. Blood stains. Signs of a struggle. And something even more chilling, a single bullet casing, the same caliber as the one that killed Samantha. Someone in that house knew the truth. Someone had seen what happened. And now, the police needed to make them talk. Why was she killed? Investigators began piecing together the timeline of Samantha's final hours. She had arrived at the trap house willingly. She knew some of the people inside. But something changed. There were rumors, whispers that Samantha had witnessed something she wasn't supposed to. Maybe a drug deal gone wrong. Maybe a violent confrontation. Or maybe, she had become a liability. Another theory emerged. Drug debts. In the world of addiction, even small amounts of money can become a death sentence. Did Samantha owe someone? Was she set up? Whatever the reason, one thing was clear: she wasn't allowed to leave. Samantha Guthrie spent her final moments in that house, surrounded by people she thought were her friends. And when she begged for her life, they made a decision. A gun was raised. A shot was fired. And Samantha's fate was sealed. Key witnesses stepped forward. At first, no one wanted to talk. The people inside the house were afraid of getting caught, afraid of retaliation. But one by one, the truth started leaking out. Someone had heard the gunshot. Someone had seen them move her body. Someone knew exactly who pulled the trigger. A woman, a known associate of those inside the house, finally broke. She came forward with a terrifying account. Samantha had been held against her will. She had been beaten. And then, they decided she had to die. But it wasn't just one person responsible. There were multiple people involved. Multiple people who stood by and did nothing. And as police gathered statements, one by one, names began to surface. The arrests begin. With witness statements, forensic evidence, and growing pressure from the public, authorities moved quickly. The first arrest was Danny Hamby. The man whose name had surfaced from the very beginning. He was known for violence, known for drugs, known for having no remorse. And now, he was accused of murder. Then came Toni Kenny. A woman with a criminal past. Someone who had been inside the house that night. Someone who knew exactly what happened. Then, William Alexander and Dylan Brown. More names. More people who had played a role in Samantha's death. But there was one chilling detail. They didn't all confess. Some denied pulling the trigger. Some claimed they weren't even in the house. Others stayed silent, hoping the evidence wouldn't be enough to convict them. Police had the suspects. But would justice be served? The trial was about to begin. Inside the walls of the courthouse, the weight of Samantha Guthrie's murder bore down on everyone in attendance. Family, friends, investigators, they all wanted justice. But before the judge could hand down sentences, they needed to hear from the people responsible. Danny Hamby sat at the center of it all. The man who had pulled the trigger. The man who had taken Samantha's life. At first, he denied everything. He wasn't there, he didn't do it. The usual lies of a man who knew what was coming. But the evidence told a different story. Ballistics matched the bullet to the casing found at the trap house. Witnesses placed him at the scene. His own past of violence and drug use painted a picture of someone who had nothing to lose. And then, after months of legal battles, he finally broke. He pleaded guilty to murder, tampering with evidence, and gross abuse of a corpse. Samantha's family watched as the judge read his sentence, life in prison. But under Ohio law, Hamby would be eligible for parole after serving 24 years. Was it justice? Would Samantha's family ever feel like it was enough? Toni Kenny, the accomplice. She could have stopped it. She could have helped Samantha. But instead, Toni Kenny was part of the plan. Toni Kenny, a woman with a criminal past, knew what was going to happen inside that house. She knew Samantha was in danger. And when it was over, she helped cover it up. At first, she tried to fight the charges. But with witness statements and forensic evidence against her, she had little choice. She was offered a plea deal. But in a shocking twist, she almost backed out. Would she risk a trial? Would she take her chances with a jury? At the last moment, she changed her mind. She pleaded guilty to kidnapping and tampering with evidence. For her role in Samantha's murder, she was sentenced to 16 years in prison. William Alexander and Dylan Brown, the cleanup crew. Samantha was dead. But the crime wasn't over. The people in that house had a choice. Call the police, tell the truth, or cover up what happened. William Alexander and Dylan Brown made their choice. They weren't the ones who fired the gun. But they were the ones who helped clean up the mess. Body disposal. Hiding evidence. Lying to investigators. Every move they made helped keep Samantha's murder hidden. But the law caught up with them. They took plea deals. William Alexander was sentenced to 12 years. Dylan Brown, 5 years. But there was one lingering question: did they get off too easy? As Samantha's mother stood before the courtroom, her voice breaking with grief, she made one thing clear: no sentence would bring her daughter back. Samantha Guthrie was gone. The people responsible were behind bars. But for her loved ones, the pain would never fade. The only thing left was to remember her. To make sure her name was never forgotten. The courtroom fell silent as Samantha Guthrie's family prepared to speak. No matter how long the sentences were, no matter how many people were held accountable, the reality remained: Samantha was never coming home. Her mother stepped forward, clutching a tissue in her hands. Her voice trembled, but her words were strong. No sentence could ever bring Samantha back, she said. No amount of time will make this pain go away. Her father spoke next, his grief barely contained. She was 18 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. And they took that from her. Samantha's scholarship, light in the darkness. Out of tragedy, something good was born. Samantha's family refused to let her story end with violence. In her honor, they created Samantha's Scholarship, a fund dedicated to helping students who are drug-free and committed to their education. A way to ensure that while her killers destroyed her future, they couldn't destroy her legacy. Justice served. The lingering debate. The case was closed. The sentences were handed down. But for many, the question remained: was justice truly served? 24 years before parole for Danny Hamby. 16 years for Toni Kenny. 12 and 5 years for the men who helped cover it up. Do you think the punishment fit the crime? The case of Samantha Guthrie was a heartbreaking reminder of how quickly trust can be betrayed. How one wrong decision, one moment in the wrong place, can lead to irreversible consequences. And for those left behind, the pain never fades. Samantha Guthrie was only 18 years old. She had dreams, a future, a family that loved her. But in one night, all of that was stolen from her. The people she trusted, the ones she thought were her friends, became her executioners. We now know who pulled the trigger. We know who helped cover it up. But one question remains. Did everyone involved tell the full truth? Did they reveal everything that happened in that house? Or are there still secrets buried along with Samantha's life? And what about the sentencing? Was justice truly served? Should Danny Hamby be eligible for parole in 24 years? Should the others have received harsher sentences? We want to hear your thoughts. Let's discuss this case together. Was justice done? Or was Samantha let down again? If you want to see more cases that deserve attention, make sure to subscribe. We cover the stories that matter, the ones that should never be forgotten. And most importantly, share Samantha's story. Because the more people who remember her, the more we keep her voice alive.